One of the things that seems to stand in our way of being happy is that shit happens. Now, this is actually the common denominator for all human experience. The fact is that even if we are the luckiest, most effective people on the planet, life sometimes deviates from our plan. And it's just like the Rolling Stones said, you can't always get what you want. And that can be quite stressful. But of course, you all know that shit happens. What is less well known is that we also all have the power to change our experience of this shit, to train and learn how to have a better attitude about it, and how to suffer less through really anything that might happen to us. Today I'm going to show you evidence that this kind of training can not only make you feel better, it can also change the way that your brain works. And the key practice I'm going to talk about is a practice of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is rooted in ancient Buddhist traditions that are aimed at the cessation of suffering. It's actually part of a system of practices that include things like loving kindness, generosity, and compassion, and it's cultivated through the practice of mindfulness meditation. In a secular context, mindfulness has actually been studied for over 30 years, and many scientists, including me, think about it as a two-component process, where the first component is attention that is oriented to this present moment, to whatever is happening to you, so you can engage with your life. The second component is attitude, and it's attitude that's open, it's curious, and it's accepting of this moment exactly as it is. And one classic instruction is to pay attention on purpose and without judgment. Or in the words of the Beatles, you just let it be. Now, why might training like this be useful? Well, one reason is because most of us are incredibly distracted pretty much all the time, and we miss a lot of what's happening to us. One study showed that our minds are actually wandering almost 50% of the time and during every single activity, even during sex. And what's worse is that mind wandering is actually related to being unhappy. And that suggests that being mindful in itself might make you happier. And it leaves you a lot more time and energy to act wisely and make good decisions. That means that being mindful allows you to respond to the world rather than react to it. And how does mindfulness do that? Well, one way it does it is by altering the brain's defaults. That is a default mode network, and you can think of it as our autopilot. It's a network of regions that's more active when our mind is spontaneously wandering and less active when we're focused on a task. And to test whether mindfulness meditation alters these defaults, we recruited experienced mindfulness meditators, not Buddhist monks, but healthy Western adults who just happen to meditate for many years, kind of like me. And we then scanned their brains using fMRI and compared their brain activity to the brain activity of well-matched controls who've never meditated. What we found is that experienced meditators actually report a significant lower amount of mind wandering and less activity and connectivity in their default mode network. Does it mean that you all need to practice many, many years to change your defaults? Apparently not. Much less training already starts changing your defaults. In one study, stretched adults were recruited and randomized into one of two conditions. They either did intensive mindfulness training for 3 days or 3 days of a control training. The results showed that even after 3 days of intensive mindfulness training, there were already some similar changes to the default mode network that were similar to what we saw with the experienced meditators. In addition, those who meditated also showed a reduction in an inflammation marker that is related to disease risk. In comparison, those who did the control training actually showed an increase in this inflammation marker. In addition, the default mode network actually was responsible for some of the reduction in inflammation. This suggests that mindfulness training changes your brain, it changes your emotional experience, and it changes your body in a way that makes you more resilient to stress and disease. And there's even more good news here. You might start noticing some of the benefits of mindfulness meditation as soon as the first time that you try. We tested this in a few recent studies. We recruited individuals who've never meditated, and we randomized them to either meditate for 10 minutes for the first time or do a control activity for 10 minutes. We then tested their performance on a task that required both accuracy and speed. What we found is that those individuals who meditated for the first time overall were faster or more accurate than those who didn't meditate. And we also saw changes in brain activity that suggested that their brains are more attuned to the task, allowing them to perform better. What this means is that in the time that it might take you to just briefly check your email, you might try to meditate for 10 minutes and you might have an improvement in your cognitive performance. So in conclusion, I invite you to ask yourself, do I want to be more focused? Do I want to be more present? Do I want to have more time and energy to act wisely and make good decisions? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you might want to try mindfulness meditation. Now, mindfulness is not for everyone and it's not a panacea, but we know that it can fundamentally alter your brain's defaults. We know that it can reduce your stress and make you more focused. And importantly, it can allow you to live in this moment, accepting it exactly as it is, maybe even loving it exactly as it is, even if shit happens. Thank you very much.
My name's Associate Professor Craig Hassard and I work at Monash University, based originally in the Department of General Practice. Mindfulness is very simple. It has to do with paying attention to the present moment, to our life as it unfolds, but also cultivating an attitude with which we pay attention. Researchers and psychologists start to adapt mindfulness to help people with chronic and relapsing depression. And when those studies started to come out showing major reductions in relapse rates, other people started to take it seriously. And literally on the back of the research, it's just gone up exponentially since the early 2000s. To the point that, say, last year alone, 2016, there were just under 700 new papers published in refereed medical, psychological journals. One of the interesting things and the challenging thing for people to understand is how mindfulness can have profound effects on our physical health. Now, to understand that, we need to understand a little bit about the fight or flight response. So for a short period of time, we're faster and we're stronger and we'll have more endurance than we normally have. Now, the unfortunate thing is that when we're not mindful, we often activate that response when we don't really need it. So one of the people to really put this on the map, the chronic effect of this overactivation of the response, was McEwen. And he described what he called allostatic load, physiological wear and tear, like flogging the car day in, day out. And that's associated with a poor immune function. We get less defense against coughs, colds, infections. We're more likely to get sick during periods of high stress, but we get more inflammation. The technical term's immune dysregulation. Metabolic effects, blood pressure, blood glucose, blood lipids are out of whack. It thins our bones. It increases the rate of atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries that leads to heart attacks and strokes and so on. If we wanted to accelerate aging, this is how to do it. But it damages the brain as well. So these stress chemicals day in, day out damage areas that are very important, like the hippocampus, so that's our learning and memory center of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, so that's working memory and executive function. These are our higher functions. And damaging those areas of the brain is not what we want to do. The effects of this high activation of the stress response and so on, the psychological, emotional stress, has even been found to go right down to the DNA of our cells. So Elizabeth Blackburn, an Australian woman who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2009 for discovering telomeres, she and her team, Elisa Epel, particularly prominent among her team, have found that overactivating this response accelerates the aging process as measured by DNA in terms of telomere length. So we can be about a decade older by middle age if we've got high levels of anger and hostility and stress and so on, compared to somebody who might have the same situation in life but is getting less stressed and reactive over them. The interesting thing is, when we practice being more mindful, then it switches off these distracted default circuits. It engages the sensory areas and the attention centers of the brain. And when we're sitting down practicing mindfulness meditation, those centers in our brain are getting a workout. It's like they're going to the gym, right? You're lifting some weights, they're on the treadmill. It starts to have a whole range of positive effects on the health. So we get immune regulation. So better immunity, we're less likely to get sick with coughs, colds, infections. It switches off excessive inflammation, takes stress off the cardiovascular system, switches down cortisol, all the damage that it has on the bones. Elizabeth Blackburn and her team have been doing work on that in a whole series of studies that started, the first one published in 2009, that showed that mindfulness switched on the repair enzyme called telomerase and has been found to slow down the rate of aging down to the DNA of the cells. If that was a drug, that would be a blockbuster drug.